This is the third of a series of videos on solving quadratic equations by finding the square root with I, or SQUEBFTSR with I. This is part 3. And what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at a type of problems that look more complicated than they really are. So let's look at all three of these problems. All three of these problems are actually SQUEBFTSR problems, because if you notice on each one of these, even though you have this parentheses with a squared term, in each one of these there's only one complicated term, only one squared term. So in each one of these that you're going to have two steps, and your steps are actually going to be simply to isolate the squared term, and two, take the square root. Now you're going to have a little bit, after you take the square root, you're going to have a little bit more work simplifying. So you can think about that as a third step if you want to. But what we're going to do is we're going to work through each one of these particular problems. So let's look at the first one. The first one, we have 3x plus 5 squared plus 10 is equal to 40. Now you might be attempted to go ahead and FOIL this out, and that would not be incorrect. That would be fine. It makes the problem quite a bit harder, but it would be a fine way to do this problem. What I like to do instead is to take a pen and to mark the squared term, just put a box around it, and then I'm going to isolate that box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and I get 3x plus 5 squared is equal to 30. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So I get x plus 5 squared is equal to 10. So that's the end of step 1. All right? Think about the steps. The first step is to isolate the square. That's what I've done. The next step is you take the square root. So when you take the square root, this just becomes x plus 5. Never forget your plus or minus, so it's plus or minus square root of 10. I'm going to simplify the square root of 10 if I can. Let's try to think that through. Square root, no, that doesn't simplify. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. And I have x is equal to minus 5 plus or minus square root of 10. And that's going to be my answer right there. So the trick to this problem is though you start with a problem that looks substantially harder than the others, it actually isn't. You just simply put a box around the squared term, isolate it, then take the square root of both sides, never forgetting your plus or minus. Let's look at another example here. The second example that we had was we had 2x minus 8 squared plus 28 is equal to 4. Again, it kind of helps if you take a pen and put a box around the complicated term, or the squared term, sorry. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 28, and I get 2x minus 8 squared is equal to minus 24. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 2 and divide by 2, and I get x minus 8 squared is equal to minus 12. And that's the first step, right? The first step again is to isolate the square. The second step is you take the square root. So if I take the square root of both sides, I get x minus 8 is equal to plus or minus the square root of minus 12. I'm going to simplify the square root first by taking a minus 1 out. So I get square root of minus 1 square root of 12, or plus or minus I square root of 12. And now I'm going to keep simplifying. Let me come on up here. I'm going to keep simplifying square root of 12. 12 becomes 4 and 3. So I get x minus 8 is equal to plus or minus I root 4 root 3. Root 4 is 2, so it's plus or minus I times 2 times root 3. Let me just write that so it's a little prettier. Plus or minus 2I root 3, x minus 8. I'm almost done. What I want is x, and I have x minus 8, so I'm simply adding 8 on both sides. And my final answer is 8 plus or minus 2I root 3. And And that's your final answer right there. And that's how you solve SQUEBFTSR problems with I.